So, recently, if you were not aware, there was a solar eclipse. I was actually in the path of totality and got a really good view of it, actually. But beholding the interplay between sun and moon got me to thinking about heavenly bodies in general, and that in turn got me to thinking of a certain book that I have in my collection, a book which I don't think is nowadays very well known at all, but which I nonetheless think is very, very important. Said book being this book right here, Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds by Bernard Le Bovier de Fontanelle. So, Bernard Le Bovier de Fontanelle was a Frenchman of the early Enlightenment era. And when I say early, I do mean early. This book was published, I believe, in the 1680s. That's right, this is a very, very old book. But Bernard Le Bovier de Fontanelle wrote articles as well as plays and various assorted kinds of different literature. But by far the most famous thing that he wrote, and definitely the most important thing that he wrote, was this book, Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds. This is not only a very, very important book in a very real world sense, but it is also a very brave book, as hopefully will be well advanced. So, what is Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds about? Well, the title kind of says it all. It is presented as a dialogue between an unnamed philosopher, although at this era in history, the word philosopher is kind of nebulous as to whether it means like an abstract thinker or like a scientist, because like the sciences used to be called like natural philosophy. So it's kind of unclear what his forte truly is. But anyway, so an unnamed philosopher and an unnamed marquise, as they walk through the marquise's gardens over the course of 5 evenings and discuss things pertaining to what they behold in the nighttime sky. That's the book. It's a very short book. It's a novella really, but it's just a dialogue between two people discussing astronomy basically. But the reason why this book is very, very brave, very, very ballsy, is because what this book puts forward was quite radical at the time. Only about 100 years prior to the publication of this book, Giordano Bruno was burnt alive by the Catholic Church for such heresies as displacing the Earth from the center of the universe. Only about 50 years prior to the publication of this book, Galileo had his freedom permanently deprived, again by the Catholic Church, for also displacing the Earth from the center of the universe. And so, as should be pretty apparent, there could have been some real pushback and some real consequences to the writing of a book such as this in its era, because there were, powers that be that were very reluctant to accept new cosmological models. Now, Bernard Le Bovier de Fontanelle was not burnt at the stake or persecuted, and the reason why he wasn't is because of just how slick this book really is. So, if you want to disseminate potentially subversive information, you have to do so with a certain panache, not unlike Aesop, the fabulist. Aesop was a storyteller in ancient Greece who lived in a repressive milieu, who was nonetheless able to convey to people certain themes and information through the medium of seemingly fanciful tales. And Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds does something similar. It takes a, at the time, potentially heretical viewpoint, but presents it through a fictitious dialogue, but also does it with great aplomb because it's very, very charmingly communicated. The tone of this book is very, very lighthearted, and beyond that, very, very flirtatious as well. And it really is just quite endearing when you're reading it. Um, and also, this book, as with Aesop's Fables, this book makes yet another very solid case for the importance of literature, the importance of fiction, as a means for exploring and disseminating ideas. Over the course of these 5 evenings, as the philosopher and the marquise talk about astronomy, they speculate on a lot of different things, such as the Earth moving around the sun, but also the sun itself being but a star, and that all the other stars out there that we see are just like our sun. Again, this may just seem, common knowledge at this point, but it wasn't always that way, and this really was kind of a radical little book for postulating these things. But beyond that, we also see that the philosopher and the marquise speculate about other worlds, other planets being inhabited potentially. And also, we see them come to understand that our place as humans in the universe occupies only one little speck, and that possibly all of creation was not created just for our use or benefit. That maybe we just occupy a very small place in something that is quite literally infinitely larger than we could possibly comprehend. So that's really what the book is about. They just talk about stuff, and I would say this, that much, if not most, of the science that is discussed in this book is by now thoroughly obsolete. Other than just the bare fact of the Earth moving through space around the sun, and the sun itself being but a star. There's a lot in here that just is just completely outmoded by now. However, despite the fact that much of its science probably doesn't hold up today, it is still important to note that I think this might just qualify as the first work of popular science. Like the works of Copernicus and Galileo were more dense stuff, oftentimes written in Latin, which were really only intended to be read by scholars and other highly educated people. But that is not the case with this book. Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds was intended to be read by anyone, to bring to anyone, man or woman, and that is a very, very important thing to note about this book as well, which I'll get to. Concepts and new ideas which they might not have considered, and to try to bring a certain new knowledge to the populace. And as I said, man or woman, that is something very, very noteworthy about Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds, is that a woman is one of the two characters in the book. Now, Bernard Le Bovier de Fontanelle says in his preface to this book that he inserted the marquise, that he put a woman into the work, because he wanted to encourage women to use those mental faculties to try to gain knowledge and learn and think. And I think that's an incredibly noble and applaudable thing to do in an era in which women were, basically just regarded as machines for making babies and nothing else. I think that is just an incredibly noble thing to do, is to actually say, women can do science too, that women have minds too, that they can use, that they can reflect and ponder and, do science just like the men. I just think that's, again, incredibly noble. And so this book is kind of revolutionary on more than one front, because not only is it introducing new concepts and ideas, but also the one of the characters in the book is a woman in a position which, prior to this book, probably no author would have put her. and is therefore trying to say, something beyond just science, but say something about who can do the science. And it's really a good book. With a lot of books this old, again, this book is old, but with a lot of books this old, you read them and you come across things. It's like, damn, that's rough. It's does not conform to modern sensibilities at all. But this book is mercifully free from instances such as that. It's a very forward thinking book in more ways than one. Uh, but now, so to rate Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds, I'm going to give this book an A minus. I am. I really, really did just love this book. Now, a question which you might have is, why bother reading a book which propounds things which are at worst just completely exploded, or at best just common knowledge at this point? And the answer to that is that while the contents of this book perhaps don't hold up so much in light of later developments, the overall tone and the overall vibe of the book most certainly does. Because the most important thing that a book can do, what all literature strives to do or should strive to do, is to embody some aspect of the human condition. And I don't always like to use the words the human condition because it sounds pretentious and cliche, but nevertheless, that is what literature should strive to do, is to embody certain aspects of what it means to be human. And Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds does so. It really does. Because, again, even though the science may no longer hold up, it nevertheless still reflects that curiosity and the desire to know which characterizes the human experience, I think. I mean, you know, people have looked up at the night sky for eons and wondered what's out there, how did it get there, what is all this stuff, where do I fit into all this? And this book encapsulates that. It really does. And it encapsulates it so charmingly, so endearingly, and so delightfully that I can't help but love it. And it is also important to note that even though the science in this book is, doesn't hold up really, um, we have to remember that the same thing, the same principle, likely holds true for our current era. Every generation, I guess, has the tendency to think that they have, found out all the answers, that what we have, the knowledge that we have at our disposal is right and unassailable, but that often turns out not to be the case. And so I have no doubt that many years down the line, there will be discoveries made that cast new light onto some things that we know now, perhaps, that calls into question the validity of certain assumptions we hold or what have you. And this book is a great reminder that can happen. It is an artifact of a bygone era, but it nevertheless still has real value to it, because even though the contents of it may no longer be unassailable, the message that it can impart is still just as true today as it was when this book was written. So yeah, to rate Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds, I will give it an A minus. I love this book. It's so charming. It's so flirty and fun to read. And even though what you're reading is, again, it's just wildly outdated science, still the vibe of it, the yearning to know and the speculation which characterizes humanity, the vacillating between rational deduction and fanciful imagining, it still rings true even if the science doesn't. So this book still has real value, and moreover, I think always will have real value. I think so. Yeah, A minus for me. So, Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds by Bernard Bovier de Fontanelle. Have you read Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it. If you have, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said today. And if you haven't, I could recommend this. I could. Now, again, I think a question that a lot of people may ask is why bother reading it when it's so old and so outdated. But like I said, you know, when this book was written, you were coming to it for the science, but now I think you would come to it for the effect, for the impressions it can give, and I think that's just as valuable as the. I think that is just as valuable reading this book now as the actual theories of the book were when it was originally written. So I could recommend this. I really could. It has something to offer still, and I think it always will. But as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.